I want to give something a try here. I haven't tried this before, but we'll see how it works together. I put this small glass, it's a little bit bigger than a shot glass, in the corner of my best shrimp colony tank. And I want to add a algae wafer. Let's see if it'll go right in there. No, almost. Alright, so take the turkey baster and whoop. One more time. Right in there. Alright, so the shrimp can go in there and eat the algae wafer, and hopefully the pest snails and limpets will be attracted to it as well. After I've given it enough time and I see how many snails and limpets enter the jar, I can remove the jar and the shrimp can easily slide out, but the snails and limpets should be stuck to the jar, and perhaps I can remove these pests that way. A few hours later, the shrimp have found the food. I don't see any snails in the jar yet, but I'll give it some time. Hopefully they'll find it. The next day, it appears that the shrimp have devoured all of the algae wafer, and there's only one or two snails hanging out in the little glass. So I'd like to try something different. Let's see what happens when I add a piece of blanched broccoli. Here we are 24 hours later after adding the blanched broccoli. Now my hands are thoroughly washed, so I'm going to get the glass out. Let's see how many snails I've caught. Give the shrimp a chance to escape. Yeah, I only caught 3, so I'm not going to call this method a success. Perhaps a snail trap would work, but I'm afraid I'm going to catch shrimp in a snail trap. So I'm not sure what the answer is. May just have to get used to having pest snails and limpets in my best shrimp colony tank. I just acclimated the juvenile white cloud mountain minnow to the 10-gallon with 7 adults, and you can see at this stage it has a very nice iridescent blue stripe down the length of the entire body. Some say they look better than neons at this stage. But that blue iridescence will slowly change to sort of a dull white iridescent stripe. Although the males do have some nice red and yellow coloration on the fins, especially when they're showing off sparring, breeding. At first, the adults kind of picked on the juvenile. Not sure if he's small enough to eat, but I think they're figuring out now that they could never devour him, so he should be fine. He's probably not big enough to consume cherry shrimplets, but I wanted to be sure and get him out of the shrimp tank before he could do so. The other four were white cloud fry are much too small to eat shrimplets and are going to need vinegar eels probably for a while longer. But this little juvenile is big enough to consume brine shrimp Nopli, so he or she should be fine in this tank. I added yeast, just 4 or 5 grains last weekend and also the weekend before last. So here's the result after 2 weeks. My Daphnia Culture, this one in particular, has exploded. Now, Fishman tried to tell me this a few years ago. I was hesitant to add yeast to my Daphnia Culture for fear I would wind up with a foul mess. But I don't notice any odor at all. The Daphnia seem to be consuming the yeast. Now, I don't know how well this is going to work in water that doesn't have some phytoplankton. They are going to have something in addition to the yeast. I do add green water from cultures outside and also a couple of green water cultures here indoors. But yeast has made all the difference, so I want to continue adding just a little bit of that, maybe once a week. Hopefully keep Daphnia going. I have lots of live food for my fish year round. I have a dozen Colombian Tetra, adult and subadult at this point. The youngest I grew out in a 10-gallon. And they're doing fine. They do tend to have some characteristics I think are the result of inbreeding. Occasionally a fish will have black blotches on its side, and I have, well, the second to youngest fish, I believe, has an incomplete gill cover. I believe that's called an operculum. But overall, the fish seem to be doing quite well. They don't tend to suffer from severe genetic disorders like guppies. And I hadn't really planned on saving the water from gravel vacuums I do of the substrate, since the fish are getting kind of inbred. But on the other hand, I can't really stand to just dispose of it. I want to give that life a chance, and if it has some deformities, well, I can just keep them. Hopefully they'll have some quality of life. I'll give the Colombian Tetra a treat of live Daphnia. Only very rarely do I see my ancistrus. This male likes to stay hidden whenever it's light. But since I added a couple of true Siamese algae eaters to this tank, they tend to gobble up the food in the vase before lights out. So more and more often the ancistrus comes to get some pellets before they're all gone. I try to make sure there's a few left over after the lights go out though. About a month ago, my 29-gallon shrimp tank sprang a leak, so I had to hurriedly do something with the inhabitants and the decor. I got most of the decorations and the shrimp into a 10-gallon tank along with the substrate, but these two driftwood ornaments on the left with java moss attached to the tops of them is too tall for a 10-gallon, so I had to transfer it to my 120-gallon tank, and inadvertently moving the decoration, there were cherry shrimp among the java moss, so they are now breeding in this tank. Now, I was hesitant. I didn't really want to put cherry shrimp in the tank for fear that shrimp would get stuck to the intakes of the hang on the back filters and shrimplets would be sucked up and killed. But that doesn't seem to be a big issue. I have seen adult cherry shrimp anyway feeding on the grill of the intake of one hang on the back filter. Don't seem to get stuck at all. So hopefully very few, if any, shrimplets will get sucked up. I think that the hang on the back filters are kind of weak since they're quite old. Maybe the shrimp can avoid that danger. But if you look closely, you can see cherry shrimp among this java moss, and there are a couple of water wisteria plants growing in it as well, but you can see at least one piece of blanched broccoli. I usually drop the blanched broccoli on top of this mat of java moss so it'll be readily available for the shrimp. It usually falls off. And the two auto sinkless I put in this tank, I've never been able to keep them happy in a 10-gallon. So even though the temperature here is a bit warm for them, mid-70s, well, it's not ideal, but they seem to be alright. Overall, I think it looks pretty good. It should look much better once the java moss fills in and I can hopefully use that to cover the intake of the hang on the back filter on the right. But all the tank inhabitants seem to be right healthy and happy, and that's the main thing.